We drove through the entire 240-kilometer width of the stunning Brooks Range that forms the Continental Divide, making excursions into the gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve, and driving along the 8 million acre Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We got to Acuminta Pass.
Not only to build a road through this, but a pipeline.
Sliding down the spectacular Chandler Shelf, we left the tundra and entered the boreal or the northern forests. The narrow Dietrich Valley was ablaze with yellow birch and spruce flashing their bright autumn colors, and hillsides were reddened with dwarf birch and crimson blueberry
Amazing
leaves.
job.
The infinite beauty of the wilderness was doubly magnified as we entered the broad valley of the Koyukuk River. Every bend on the road provided the most soul-satisfying autumn scenery on the face of this planet. After a night's sojourn in Fairbanks, we left by Alaska Railroad's glass-domed Denali Star for the spectacular 200-kilometer journey into the Denali National Park, home to America's highest mountain, Mount McKinley. It was the rutting season for moose and caribou, and Denali was full of energy. Driving over 200 kilometers in the broad expanse of the park, its floor carpeted with wild flowers and berries, and black and white spruce and yellow birch glowing in blazing autumn colors, and glaciers sweeping down snowy, shimmering mountains, our eyes feasted on nature's living tapestry.
Sometimes it's blood, sweat, and tears on Alaska's last frontier. But life is simple, life is good when you're living like you should. Hey, hey, sometimes it's struggle, strife.
Fathers, sons, brothers, wives.
But we're making our way. And yes, we'll stay right here on Alaska's last frontier.
From Homer, on the western coast of Alaska, we sailed over 6 days through the interiors of Alaska on rough seas, in bad weather and poor visibility. From Seattle, we took the Coast Starlight train for the 2-day ride down the US West Coast to San Diego. Crossing into Mexico at the Tijuana border, we took a bus for the long haul to Guadalajara, a 36-hour journey covering 2,400 kilometers. Soon after leaving the city limits, we got into the mountainous region of La Rumorosa. And we drove along the beautiful Sonoran Desert that stretches from northwest Mexico into Arizona and California. Hurricane Manuel delayed us by 12 hours as it had damaged bridges and caused landslides, flooding, accidents, and death. Guadalajara is a fascinating historic city, and we visited all its ancient churches and streets and markets to pay our respects to the residing spirits and ghosts, and resolved to return to this wonderful city.
Angelitos familiares.
Near Oaxaca are the petrified waterfalls, a 2,000-year-old cypress tree, 52 meters in circumference, the stoutest tree in the world, and the ruined Zapotec cities of Monte Alban and Mitla, thriving settlements from 200 BC but suffering damage and decay for the last 1200 years. 500 kilometers east of Oaxaca is the Subidero Canyon.
Ahí a nuestra derecha estamos viendo la cascada El Árbol de Navidad. Cascada El Árbol.
Just outside the quaint township of San Cristobal, we ran into roadblocks placed by the
Dirán
striking
que
teachers.
eso algún día se va a ver. Mentira. No, eso no se va a ver. Se está viendo. Se está viviendo.
Our next halt was Palenque, one of the most celebrated Mayan sites in all of Americas, dating back to 7th century AD. Bompak and Yaxchilan were the other important Mayan sites that we visited in the area. Crossing the river Usumacinta in a motorized canoe, we stepped into Guatemala. Driving through the Mayan Biosphere Reserve, we called on Tikal, the largest and most powerful Mayan state that has monuments from the 4th century BC. According to a recent study published in Science, the Mayan cities were gradually abandoned due to climate change that took place over 2 centuries. Leaving the ruins of Tikal, we visited Antigua, the old capital of Guatemala, flattened thrice by earthquakes, yet flourishing with Spanish We drove through lava slopes to the top of the Masaya volcano and looked down into its yawning crater, billowing thick clouds of gaseous sulfur. The sprawling Lake Nicaragua, 8,300 square kilometers of fresh water, the biggest lake in Central America, and the Chinese proposed to build an alternative Panama Canal here. Crossing into Costa Rica, we drove to the cloud forest in Monteverde and for 3 reposeful days lived among the wild and majestic trees, fragrant flowers, and colorful birds.
The island is like actually 2 little islands together. It's just like you drive. You're like really angry.
San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica, was in a state of excitement as Costa Rica was playing against Mexico to qualify for the FIFA World Cup. A 17-hour journey brought us to Panama City. The Darien Gap, a 176-kilometer forest corridor, separates Panama from Colombia and South America. Environmentalists have ensured that there is no road or railways passing through this dense jungle. We flew into Cartagena on the Atlantic coast of Colombia to begin our journey through South America. Colombia is named after Columbus, who never set foot on this land. Cartagena is an enchanting colonial city and a World Heritage. Of suffering, Medellin is getting back on track. Compassionate and inclusive public policies are taking the progressive people forward. We rode the cable car over Medellin slums that connect the poor and labor class to the metro system, saving them 2 to 3 hours of commuting each way. Leaving Cali, the narrow road snaked its way up thickly wooded mountains. Cali is known as the salsa capital of the world, and unless you're a salsa freak, it is definitely avoidable. The road to Pasto and beyond to the border of Ecuador continued through the high Andes. There were volcanoes in abundance, their steep slopes flourishing with farms of corn, beans, and potatoes. Before crossing into Ecuador, we drove to the nearby Las Lajas Sanctuary, a picturesque basilica church located inside the canyon of Guatemala River, where another apparition of Virgin Mary had appeared some decades ago. A scintillating 2-hour drive through the Andean landscape of high mountains, narrow valleys, and deep canyons brought us to Otavalo, famous for its ancient pre-Inca market. Fortunately, next day was Saturday, the liveliest day of the market, when the highland Indians from 70 surrounding villages bring their farm produce, animals, and handicrafts for barter and sale. We weaved through the shuffling masses, all of them sun-baked and deeply wrinkled, and attired in their traditional costumes of centuries ago, and containing enough dust to show for it. Driving along light volcanoes, we got to Quito, stuffed capital of Ecuador, lying at almost 10,000 feet, and the first city to be declared a World Heritage Site in 1978. Ecuador is probably the only country in the world named after a geographical feature, the equator, which is 23 kilometers north of Quito. Exhibits here show the process of scalping and shrinking heads. At 19,347 feet, Cotopaxi is one of the highest active volcanoes in the world. Since its first recorded eruption in 1534, this hot-headed volcano has blown up 86 times. It is one of the very few mountains located close to the equator that has a glacier. We climbed to a little over 16,000 feet to the mouth of the receding glacier. From Quito, we made a side trip, flying 1,000 kilometers over the Pacific to Galapagos Islands. For the next 3 days, we sailed to several of the volcanic islands thrown up by the sea and met their resident animals and birds.
En Santa Cruz.
Oh, the
En la-
beaches in Santa Cruz.
Crossing into Peru, we spent a night at the lawless frontier town of Tumbes. Driving along the Pacific coast and through an arid moonscape flushed with oil and gas to the town of Chiclayo, where we called on the commodious tomb of the Lord of Zipan, where the pre-Inca Moche noble lay buried in peace for over 1600 years until he was discovered in 1987 and stripped for inspection. In terms of gold, jewelry and artifacts discovered, the tomb equals that of the Egyptian king Tutankhamen. Also in the region is Tucumé, where the Chimu people who took over from the Moche built their sprawling capital with 26 pyramids. These structures were made of mud bricks that, over the centuries, were battered by rain into their present sandhill form, leaving no semblance of the original form. The Witches Market in Chiclayo has available all kinds of hallucinogenic cacti, herbs, animal skulls, skins, bones, magic lotions, and other essentials required for black magic and shamanic healing. A 200-kilometer night drive south brought us to Trujillo, famous for its Moche ruins of their most sacred temples of the sun and moon. More and more historically significant sites are being discovered in Peru, pushing its cultural, political, and economic evolution even further back in time. In Lima, the romantic capital of Peru, the mayor hosts a kissing competition every year. The current record for the longest kiss at this venue is 6.5 hours. The rest of Lima, with its imposing colonial structures and lively plazas, is romantic too. En route, Lima to Nazca, sunny desert. Taking the scenic coastal route, we got to Nazca and flew over the mysterious lines in a 5-seater Cessna. These gigantic geocliffs that can be seen only from the air are etched over a boundless arid landscape that slopes gently away from the mountains. From Nazca, we climbed higher and higher into the Andes, driving over 14,000 feet amongst snow-clad mountains that fringed an outlandish medieval world on the slopes and narrow valleys. Spellbound, we descended to 11,200 feet to Cusco, the capital of the great Inca Empire. Outside Cusco are the palaces of Inca kings made from gigantic stones. The sacred valley through which flows the Urubamba River has mountain sides covered with terraced fields of the Inca period. From one end of the sacred valley, we boarded the train for Machu Picchu. The track runs along the rushing Urubamba River. Machu Picchu, the Inca site the world craves to see, is supremely located. The visual effect is stunning. That's about all. It does not speak of a high civilization. They'd hauled up rocks from long distances, up steep slopes, and immaculately pieced them together without using mortar to house their useful leaders in comfort. Architecturally, the Inca structures are no better than the basic shelters made by the nomads and cattle herders living in the Himalayas. Machu Picchu was built around 1450 AD. The cut and paste technology of the Inca was way behind the Egyptians, who built their exquisite temples in Luxor 3,300 years earlier. The Greeks, who built their stately Parthenon 1900 years before them. The beautiful Roman temples that predate them by 2,000 years. The flawlessly sculpted Konark Sun Temple and the Qutub Minar in India that were constructed 200 to 300 years earlier as was the splendid Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Crossing the La Raya Pass between Cusco and Puno, we entered the Andean Altiplano. With an average altitude of 12,300 feet, it is the second highest plateau in the world after Tibet. It is here that the ranges of the Andes are at their widest. Puno is on Lake Titicaca. With the surface area of about 8,400 square kilometers, it is the largest lake in Latin America, and at 12,507 feet, the highest navigable lake in the world. On the lake are a group of man-made floating islands woven together using every part of the Totora reed by the Aymara people who escaped here from the Inca invaders. Another 3 hours of sailing brought us to the 6-kilometer Taquil Island. These islanders still abide by the pre-Inca model code: do not be lazy, do not lie, and do not steal. They dress in their traditional attire, which is different from clothes worn elsewhere in Peru or South America. While women spin yarn and weave, knitting is done exclusively by men. Leaving Puno for La Paz, the road skirted the shores of the lake for endless miles. In Bolivia, the road continued along the lake and a ferry crossing was made at its narrowest point. The lake slowly fading from view, we drove along a continuous range of snow mountains till we got to La Paz, the chaotic capital of Bolivia and the largest city of the Andean Altiplano, where we were greeted by a 6-kilometer long street carnival. These beautiful cholitas are vicious wrestlers, and you see them in action here. The condors in La Paz Zoo seem to be friendlier than the cholitas. Taking a dusty track, we drove 2 hours north of La Paz to the ancient archaeological site of Tiwanaku, that is elephant seals on the peninsula were proposing to have babies of their own.
Oh, que se corran, güey.
Esa rampa que no se sube arriba.
The Valdez Peninsula, a World Heritage Site, is also the nesting ground of the Magellanic penguins. 700,000 are said to reside in this colony alone. We continued down the Atlantic coast for 4 days, crossing the Magellan Strait and driving down the length of Tierra del Fuego before arriving in Ushuaia, the southernmost habitat in the world. For 4 days, we trekked in the wilds of the Tierra del Fuego National Park, before boarding the ship with 40 other passengers. For 4 fabulous days, we enjoyed stunning views of the fjords and glaciers of the Beagle Channel. Of South America ended after 4 months our 35,000 kilometer journey.